Thank you.
Attorney Sitzberger, you will be using the lapel.
Yes.
All right, you can.
Did a sound check, I think.
Do you need the podium at all?
I do not.
And Madam Reporters, you have a good view of everyone? Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the state, I'm going to take this opportunity. It's really our first and only opportunity to thank you all for your attention going forward. We talked a lot yesterday about how long this trial is going to go. That's certainly not lost on us, what we're taking you all away from, and we appreciate it. I want you to know we've all worked hard to organize ourselves and make sure we can go through this as quickly and efficiently as possible over these next few weeks. That being said, there is a lot to unpack in a case like this. While I go through my opening, you're going to see almost two timelines. As I prepared for this, I kept seeing almost two timelines emerging. There's certainly a factual, bare bones timeline of theft, murder, and more theft. But there's this almost overlaid timeline of all of the defendant's lies and deceit on top of that bare bones timeline. That's a little bit tricky to go through and process, but let's start it. So this is Wisconsin versus Jessy Kurcewski. Said otherwise, this is a case of murder, greed, and lies. The judge just read you the 3 counts. Of course, in the law, we call murder intentional homicide, and that's count 1. And it's a homicide or murder of Lynn Hernan. Count 2 is a theft of over $100,000 of Lynn Hernan. And those date ranges, January 1st of 2016 until October 3rd of 2018, really represent the theft while Lynn Hernan was still alive. And then count 3 is yet more theft, more greed, of theft of almost $87,000 from Lynn Hernan's estate from October 4th until July 9th of 2019, after her murder. We all come into court with ideas of what homicide or murder are and what a theft is, and certainly there's legal elements that have to be proved that the judge read to you, and we'll go through a bit more because as the party that has to prove each of those elements to you, I want to make sure you have a good understanding of what intentional homicide is, not just sort of the classic example of somebody shooting another individual in the head and killing them. It can be many things. In this case, a poisoning. But first, though I said this is a case against Jessy Kurcewski, murder, greed, and lies, at the heart of this case, what I don't want to be lost on you is this is a case about Lynn Hernan, the victim. So let's see who Lynn Hernan was. Lynn Hernan was an individual with a small but close group of friends. I think you're going to see as the evidence comes in that it was really 2 distinct groups of friends. On the one side was Miss Kurcewski and her mother, Jennifer Flower. On the other side was these individuals, Keith Lang, Corrine Posa, Jim Kelleher, and Anthony Posa. And you'll hear from many of them. Now, interestingly, Lynn Hernan was also an individual with no children of her own. So she sort of pseudo-adopted her friend, Jennifer Flower's daughter, Jessy Kurcewski, and did the same thing with Corrine Posa's son, Anthony. And you're going to hear that they were named the 2 beneficiaries of Lynn Hernan's will, or her estate, and we'll get into that a lot as well. Lynn was also a cat lover. That seems like a flippant thing I put on there, but it's actually very important because, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but at the very day of October 3rd, when police come and talk to Jessy Kurcewski, they ask her point blank, do you think this could be a suicide? And her answer was, well, yes or no, I don't really know. I don't think Lynn would have left her cats. And that's what Anthony, Jim, and Corrine will also tell you. That Lynn was a person who didn't just love her cats like many people. She loved her cats. She was not going to leave her cats alone to fend for themselves or let somebody else come in and take care of these cats. The cat lover part is actually a very important part to all of this. While she loved cats, hated technology. Didn't own a computer, didn't own a smartphone, used a flip phone sort of when she had to, didn't use email, had no email address of her own, had no way of checking it, didn't know how to check it. When she paid bills, it was with cash or over the phone, making transfers through the bank over the phone. or going in person to a branch and making a payment on a credit card or utility bill or something like that. You're going to see, and we'll get into pattern of life and what that is and what that means. But Lynn was not a person to go online and pay a bill. She was not checking her credit card statements online. She was not checking email. She was doing nothing. Had no computer or any device to access the internet. And frankly, dead at only 62 years old from a tetrahydrozoline poisoning after the defendant gave her a bottle laced with Visine eye drops to drink. So I told you we'd get into the legalities of what is intentional homicide. Right? The judge just read these. I'm not going to go through each part the judge just read you, but I am going to highlight that we have to prove to you that Ms. Kurcewski caused the death of Lynn Hernan. I want to highlight that her act has to be a substantial factor. And certainly here you're going to hear, really in the defendant's own words, that she gave Ms. Hernan a bottle of water that she knew to be filled with Visine eye drops. Second element, that Ms. Kurcewski was aware or intended to kill Lynn Hernan. And that can mean that she was aware or practically certain that her act was going to kill Lynn Hernan. We're going to show you that, again, with the defendant's own statement. And when she's talking to detectives after she's told, because there's many versions of the defendant's statement, and they constantly change as she gathers more information through law enforcement. But ultimately, she admits to giving that bottle with Visine in it for Lynn Hernan to drink. And when the detectives ask her, well, did you know that was going to kill her? She says, I was sick because I knew it could kill her. And you're going to hear that knowing that, Ms. Kurcewski still left Lynn Hernan alone, left her house. In fact, you're going to hear that she didn't spend the day worried about Lynn. She was opening a JCPenney account in Lynn's name that same morning. And she was using other accounts of Lynn to go shopping, do some online shopping, while she knew she had just given Lynn poison. Let's talk about intent. Lynn Hernan's not here to tell you what went on October 3rd, 2018. So you have to look at all of the defendant's acts, words, and statements. That's sort of subcategory 1. And then over here, you have to look at all the facts and circumstances that were going on around October 3rd, 2018 for us to show you that Jessy Kurcewski did intend to kill Lynn Hernan. Again, the judge just read this to you, but it's important. We often hear motive in TV shows and movies. The state always talks about, what was the motive? Here's her motive. We don't have to prove motive to you. That's not something in those two elements. We do have to show intent. We don't have to show motive. As this instruction said, motive is often helpful. And here it's pretty simple. As we go through the financials fairly painstakingly, you're going to see that the access Ms. Kurcewski had to Lynn Hernan allowed her to steal every dollar almost that Lynn Hernan was worth in life. And knowing that she was going to be the personal representative of Lynn Hernan's estate, you're going to see that in or about October 3rd, 2018, Lynn Hernan became worth more dead than alive to Jessy Kurcewski. But it's important to note, intent is not the same as motive. The theft counts really go to that motive, but they're separate crimes. Again, here are the elements, verbatim from what the judge just read to you. I try as best I can in openings to let the jury know what I think your job is really going to boil down to. And so with element 1, that's going to be pretty simple for you. That Jessy Kurcewski intentionally transferred property of Lynn Hernan between January of 2016 and October of 2018. You're going to see, and we're going to focus on 28 checks that were all written off Lynn Hernan's account to Jessy Kurcewski. By her cashing those, that's transferring property. That's just element 1 right there. This wasn't a bank error. This wasn't an, oh my gosh, it went into my account and I don't know who deposited this. This is just transferring property. That's element 1, period. What becomes an issue is elements 2 and 3. Again, did Lynn Hernan consent to those money transfers into the defendant's accounts? So that's kind of 2 and 3 rolled in together. And we'll talk about that going forward. Again, number 4 is going to be easy. I don't think you're going to have to spend much time worried about element 4 because it's going to be clear that the defendant never paid back any dollar amount to Lynn either while she was living And even though she had access to the estate account as personal representative, she didn't put any money back into the estate. That she said, oh, when she died, I owed Lynn $144,000, so let me put that back in the estate. Not a single dollar went back to Lynn Hernan, either alive or dead. So number 4, absolutely, the defendant intended to permanently deprive Lynn Hernan of these monies. So let's talk about that consent. It's the same in count 3, rather quickly, the estate. And this, as Ms. Kurcewski and Anthony Poza were the only 2 beneficiaries of Lynn Hernan's property at that point, really this becomes a theft from Anthony Poza. What should have happened was whatever Lynn Hernan's estate was truly worth gets split down the middle, and Jessy Kurcewski should have gotten half, Anthony Poza should have gotten the other half. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Again, consent will be an issue. For count 4, that should be transferred, I apologize about that. But the transfer of property in element 1 and the permanently deprive in element 4 will not be an issue. You're going to see numerous cash withdrawals that Ms. Kurcewski made from Lynn's estate account to herself, where she's just taken out thousands of dollars, roughly $50,000 in cash withdrawals from the estate account. Again, never paid back. We're going to talk about an inheritance loan funding, where essentially Ms. Kurcewski made an agreement with a company that said, I'll put up $10,000 of the inheritance I'm supposed to get if you give me $18,700 right now. And she paid that back, and they refunded some of the money. She should have plugged that refund back into the estate. But the point is, she took all that money out of the estate. She didn't wait for her inheritance to put that up. She didn't pay back any of the money. So we have roughly $50,000 in cash withdrawals. We have this sort of bogus loan fund that she takes for herself out of the estate, never paying anything back. And we have a number of checks again, written to either the defendant's own credit cards, to her mother's apartment rent, or just to cash for herself, to the tune of almost $87,000 out of the estate. Again, I included this again because for theft, just like for the intentional homicide, again, Lynn's not here to tell you what she consented to because she was murdered on October 3rd, 2018. So you have to, as jurors, look at what the defendant was doing around this time. What are all the facts and circumstances surrounding this time frame now of October 4th to July 9th of 2019? So going back to count 1, I kind of talked about this. But we have this murder element to this case, right? Murder, greed, and lies. The murder part is that our own medical examiner for Waukesha County has been doing this for roughly 35 years. He's going to come in and tell you that as she did her job in this case, she determined the manner of death in this case to be homicide, and that the cause of death was tetrahydrozoline poisoning. Now, she didn't come to that conclusion lightly. She didn't look at one sheet of paper and look at some autopsy photos and look at some scene photos and say, I got it. This case took a lot of time. This took months and months for Dr. Bidzricki to come to her conclusions. She consulted with Dr. Kasinko, who you'll hear from NMS Labs, regarding tetrahydrozoline in general, effects on the body when it's ingested and not just put in the eyes. Dr. B herself ordered several toxicology reports after the original one. She wanted to see more information, as much as she could get. So she was constantly sending lab work out for more toxicology reports. You'll hear she did her own research. She obviously got to see Lynn's body very close in time to October 3rd. And about that, she'll tell you that in her experience over that 35 years, she thought this death scene looked staged. She's been to a number of drug overdose deaths and the scenes, and she'll tell you that this one struck her as being staged. Because she'll tell you that people who legitimately overdose on drugs and end up killing themselves do not have piles of powder sitting on their chest. They don't have powder and pill fragments up in their hair. They don't have pills laying everywhere. They take everything. There's really nothing usually left behind. And so she'll tell you about her observations and why that stuck out to her as something being off about that initial crime scene. She'll obviously tell you about her autopsy and going through that. But by and large, my point is this was not a quick decision she made to say, oh, it's probably a homicide. Let's see how it plays out. This is diligent, thorough work Dr. Bidzricki did to reach her conclusions of homicide and cause of death being tetrahydrozoline poisoning. And she'll tell you there were other drugs or substances in Lynn's system, many pharmaceuticals, but she's still going to tell you that the overall cause of death was that tetrahydrozoline poisoning, eye drops. We know that the defendant, Ms. Kurcewski, killed Lynn Hernan again because eventually, after her story changes a number of times, she admits to detectives that she knowingly gave Lynn Hernan a bottle filled with Visine. And as you can see, Visine has tetrahydrozoline. They're not synonymous, but when we talk about tetrahydrozoline in this case, we're oftentimes talking about Visine. Again, defendant had the intent to kill Lynn Hernan. This is, again, taken directly from the jury instruction as to what intent means. And there it is again. After admitting that she gave this bottle laced with Visine to Lynn Hernan, she told detectives she knew it could very well kill Lynn. She still left, went shopping, opened other credit cards in Lynn's name while Lynn was dying of poisoning. So again, what are all the acts, words, and statements of the defendant? That kind of leads to my greed portion of this whole trial. As to count 2, there's the total figure we're going to show you, and that's for 28 checks from 2 different bank accounts of Lynn. Over $144,000 taken in about a 2 to 2.5 year span of time. What you'll also see in that time is the defendant was getting paychecks direct deposited into her account. So you'll be able to see exactly what legitimate income she was making from her job when she was unemployed and not making any legitimate income from a job. And over this same span of time, January 1st of 2016 to October 3rd, 2018, her total earnings through jobs at various dental offices was right around $49,000. Now, you're going to see that she absolutely needed to have this $144,000 because when we go through all of Ms. Kurcewski's credit cards, bank statements, spendings, you'll see that in that same time span, 2.5, almost 3 years, her earnings were $49,000, her total expenditures over $500,000. You're also going to see that on these 28 checks. I'm sorry, first of all, this doesn't count. This $144,000 figure does not count all of Lynn's credit cards suddenly being maxed out and over their limit. It doesn't count a $30,000 loan that Ms. Kurcewski took out in Lynn Hernan's name after altering bank documents. We've lost the TV. There we go. Thank you. All right. So, bottom line, by October of 2018, an account of Lynn Hernan's, which from 2014 until spring of 2016 held $250,000. Actually, there was about $500 of interest collected on that in those 2 years. By October of 2018 is down to $87.72. You're going to hear that of that significant chunk gone, Lynn Hernan made 2 rather large purchases for herself. In 2016, she bought herself a Jeep and paid for that out of this account. And she also bought herself some jewelry. You're going to hear that for much of Lynn Hernan's life, she lived paycheck to paycheck, dollar to dollar, until around 2014 when her mom died and left her $250,000 in inheritance. And so she buys herself a Jeep, and she buys herself some jewelry that she ends up paying. She puts on a credit card, but pays down off this account with her inheritance in it. Beyond that, $134,000, more than half, is all 20 checks written to Jessy Kurcewski. Of those 20 checks from that account, we'll keep going. Of those 20 checks, 19 of them have a very specific purpose written in the memo. Some say Kohn, K-O-H-N, Law Office. Some say Prosper Funding. Some say America Advance. Some say Citibank. The point is that you'll see the money leave Lynn Hernan's account, go into the defendant's account, and never do any amounts leaving Ms. Kurcewski's account go to those purposes? Deceit and greed. There's another account Ms. Hernan had that's down to $52 by October of 2018. Here we are. But that involves 10 checks written to Ms. Kurcewski for another $10,000. That represents that $144,000 figure. Okay, let's catch up here a little bit. And that's another point. Out of these 20 checks, there's a 21st check out of this account that's written to the Jeep dealership for Lynn's Jeep. Other than those 21 checks, not a single check will you see come out of Lynn Hernan's account to anybody else. This was not an account she was using. But Ms. Kurcewski had access, and Ms. Kurcewski knew that Lynn Hernan didn't have internet to easily check these things. Again, none of these amounts are ever paid back in life or in death to Lynn Hernan. So let's talk about patterns of life. I mentioned that before. Very quickly, as we go through with Detective Plennis, all the financial statements, and there's quite a few of them, and again, we'll try our best to work through them efficiently but thoroughly for you. You're going to see patterns of Lynn Hernan emerge, right? I told you that most of her friends will even tell you, and it's substantiated by her financial statements, she was often a person to use cash. Her credit cards were not used very often. But when they were generally at businesses like Pick and Save in Waukesha, Speedway gas stations in Waukesha, things of that nature. When she used her credit cards, they were paid down very quickly. Her credit score was up in the high 700s to low 800s for much of this time span we'll be talking about, January of 16 to October of 18. No online activity, no IP activity is on her accounts until approximately June of 2018, when Lynn's pattern of almost 2 years at that point that we can see starts to look a lot like Ms. Kurcewski's, where now all of a sudden we're seeing Lynn's credit cards being used a lot, balance is not being paid down, or maybe just the bare minimum so that interest is piling up. We know that Ms. Kurcewski, as I said, she's earning $49,000 of legitimate income in this time, and she's spending well over $500,000. You're going to see that most of those purchases are ATMs, businesses in West Allis, Hales Corners, and Franklin, specific businesses that were talked to about yesterday, Scotty's Pub and Stallis Palace being two of the most prevalent, but also Potawatomi. And you also see that there's frequent online activity. And Detective Plennis will tell you why that's important for law enforcement to recognize that when somebody's pattern of life switches to another person's pattern of life, what does that mean? What does that overlap? What does that change mean? And finally, defendant's acts, words, and statements. And this is to count 3. Taking advantage of her role as the personal representative of Lynn Hernan's estate to steal over $87,000. Again, you're going to see numerous cash withdrawals. You're going to see checks to her own credit cards, checks to cash, and that inheritance loan funding of $18,700. And that brings us to the lies. And this goes on for a number of slides, and I promise you, I pared these down for opening statements. You're going to hear a number of others as this trial goes. But this is kind of that second timeline I'm talking about that goes back now and sort of lays over the bare bones time work. But in March of 2018, Detective Plennis and I are going to show you and talk a lot about clearly altered bank documents where Ms. Kurcewski changed the name of the account holder to Lynn, changed the yearly earnings, changed any reference to spendings at Stallis Palace and Potawatomi, all to get a $30,000 loan in Lynn Hernan's name, but went in to Jessy Kurcewski's account. You're going to see that it went in on March 8th of 2018. That same day, Jessy Kurcewski adds Lynn Hernan to her bank account as a secondary user, obviously so that this loan in Lynn Hernan's name can go into that account. Furthermore, in spring of 2018, and you're going to hear, and Scott Craig is the former boyfriend of Jessy Kurcewski. He was the boyfriend of Ms. Kurcewski until July 9th of 2019 when she was arrested. He'll tell you that he knew of Lynn, knew who Lynn Hernan was. He thought it was a woman that Jessy Kurcewski helped care for, a family friend of Jessy Kurcewski, but he never met her. And in spring of 2018, Ms. Kurcewski tells her boyfriend, who she's living with, who they've been in a relationship for 3 years, she tells him that Lynn is in a coma at Frederick Hospital. That's sometime in spring of 2018, he remembers. Scott Craig will tell you that he believed on October 3rd, 2018, when Ms. Kurcewski tells him over the phone that Lynn has passed away, Scott Craig believed that Jessy Kurcewski was at Frederick Hospital in Lynn's hospital room. He remembers feeling bad, but ultimately not surprised because he thought this woman had been in a coma for 5 months and that it was sort of a natural outcome. Ms. Kurcewski never came clean to Scott Craig. It wasn't until July of 2019 when detectives show up at his door and tell him that Lynn Hernan did not die in Frederick Hospital. She was not in a coma for 5 months. And you'll hear a jail call between Ms. Kurcewski that she makes to her boyfriend a few days after her arrest, Scott Craig, where he's furious that she lied to him about such a huge thing. And you'll hear her try to say, it's only one thing. It's only one thing. What's the big deal? On October 3rd, as we talked about, she's using Lynn Hernan's credit cards, even after giving her this bottle of poison. She's opening up a JCPenney card. She's using that JCPenney card immediately after opening it, about 10:30 in the morning. We move to October 8th of 2018. She goes and picks up Lynn Hernan's jewelry from the medical examiner's office, and within 2 weeks is selling 3 pieces of jewelry to Robert Hack. And what's interesting about this is that Robert Hack makes you declare how long you've owned an item before they're just going to let you sell it, right? They don't want people just taking things that aren't theirs and coming in and selling it and getting the money. Ms. Kurcewski fills out 3 separate forms saying one of these items that she picked up 2 weeks ago, she's owned for 2.5 months. Another one that says she owned it for 3 or 3.5 months. And the third piece she says she has owned for 6 months. Moving to later in October and early November of 2018, you're going to see that there's even more credit card activity for Lynn Hernan's credit cards, weeks after she's dead. In January of 19, here's another big one that involves Scott Craig. He wakes up one day to hear from Ms. Kurcewski, who went out the night before. There's a big text message conversation where she's claiming she feels very sick and thinks she was drugged at the bar last night. She elaborates and she goes on to say, I had to go to the hospital. This is very serious. And she says, in January of 2019, and it's important to know that Dr. Bedzricki had not yet made a determination of the cause of death to be tetrahydrozoline poisoning. And the detectives had not told Ms. Kurcewski what that cause of death was because it hadn't been made yet. And yet here she is telling her boyfriend that she's at the hospital and the doctors had her run tests and that she is found to have been poisoned by tetrahydrozoline. She doesn't say eye drops. She doesn't say Visine. She says they found tetrahydrozoline in my system. She tells her boyfriend that this is serious. This can kill you. In July, fast forward to July 9th of 2019, when detectives now tell Ms. Kurcewski that Lynn died of tetrahydrozoline poisoning, she seems shocked and then says, I didn't even know you could die from that. Months after telling her boyfriend, this is serious, you can die from this. Next, to February of June of 2019, the police will tell you all about how they go through people's phones. They went through Scott Craig's phone. They went through Jessy Kurcewski's phones. They went through some other phones, and they download them. And they're good at getting everything they can, including some deleted things. And lo and behold, on Ms. Kurcewski's phone, between February and June of 2019, they find a number of documents that she deleted from her phone. The subjects are, quote, criminal poisoning, cyanide poisoning, and household poisons. Those all show in the phone download that they were accessed. I mean, somebody opened them on her phone in July of 2018. Moving to April of 2019. Anthony Poza, who I told you earlier, was like sort of an adopted son to Lynn. He's the other beneficiary on the will. So Ms. Kurcewski has to run everything by him, and he has to sign off on things before she can close the estate. he feels like something's off. He doesn't think something's right, and he asks to see receipts. And a few weeks later, Ms. Kurcewski sends him 52 pages of receipts or invoices. Detective Plennis will talk to you at length about how he went through each one of them. Some of our witnesses will be very fast witnesses who will look at a receipt or an invoice that was given to Anthony Posa, and they will tell you this is not our company's invoice at all. This is completely made up. Detective Plennis looked into all the financials. If Ms. Kurcewski claimed to pay off a credit card of Lynn Hernan, Detective Plennis looked at it and found it to be false. Almost all of these 52 pages are completely false documents that were given to Anthony Posa by Ms. Kurcewski. Conveniently, about a month or less after she purchased Adobe Acrobat on one of her credit cards. That will show you. And finally, more lies. When she talks to detectives in both March and July of 2019, her story changes a number of times. And Detective Hoppy is going to tell you all about those. But even on the scene, I told you before, her initial statement to the scene officer, who just said point blank, "You called this in, Ms. Kurcewski? You're friends with Lynn Hernan. Do you think this could be a suicide?" She doesn't say, "Yes, absolutely. Lynn was suicidal for a long time, and what a tragic ending." She says, "I don't. Yes and no. I don't think she'd leave her cats." In March of 2019, she writes an email to one of the detectives on the case and says in that email she has a hard time believing Lynn would commit suicide. Okay? Now, July of 2019, she's arrested. She's told this is a poisoning and that police now know the medical examiner has deemed this a homicide and they don't think it's a suicide. Now, Ms. Kurcewski starts claiming that Lynn was suicidal for months leading up to October of 2018. She still denies helping in any way or knowing anything about Visine many times. Ultimately, then her story changes again. And she says, okay, well, one time I put 2 drops of Visine in a glass of water for her because I just knew that she was drinking Visine. But that's it, that's all. To ultimately stating, again, that quote, she finally gave that water bottle, knowing it had, in the defendant's estimation, 6 bottles of Visine to Lynn Hernan, knowing it could kill her. And walks out of that condo unit, closes the door, and goes shopping on Lynn's dime. And then that leads into a law enforcement goose chase, I'll call it, where Detective Hoppy will tell you, I suspect with some frustration in his voice, about more lies Ms. Kurcewski told law enforcement. Starting with, you guys, there's a recording from Lynn, there's suicide letters, there's all this evidence that'll show I'm not guilty of any of this. There's evidence out there, there's evidence out there. It starts with this storage shed. She says, check a storage shed. Detective Hoppy says, where's the storage shed? And very quickly, Ms. Kurcewski goes, kind of laughing, says, there was never a storage shed. I was going to get a storage shed, never did, but that's what I was going to, but there's no storage shed. So next, she tells Detective Hoppy, we have to check a BMO Harris bank lockbox. And the detectives do, they did before, and they learn that it's empty. There's nothing in there. They also learn that Ms. Kurcewski and her mom, Jennifer Flower, were the last ones to access that bank box, and just so happened to do so on October 4th, 2018, the very day after Lynn died. So when Ms. Kurcewski is telling Detective Hoppy to check the lockbox, she already knows it's empty because she was there, and she was the last one there the day after Lynn died. So that doesn't work. So she now changes to say, well, I buried a lot of stuff in Whitnall Park, kind of by the nature center. And Detective Hoppy will tell you that another detective was out there in Whitnall Park with a metal detector and a shovel. They were trying to use video access to have Ms. Kurcewski tell us, where in the world do we find these things? Spoiler alert, they found nothing. There was no magical, mysterious hole at Whitnall Park. Just more lies from Ms. Kurcewski. And finally, in October and November of 2019, Ms. Kurcewski is removed by the court as personal representative of Lynn's estate, mostly because of this investigation. She takes that and says, well, now there's a real will I have to file. Almost a year to the day, almost, of filing the actual original will that's notarized by 2 impartial people. Ms. Kurcewski now files a, quote, real will. And wouldn't you believe, it removes Anthony Posa as a beneficiary. You're going to hear from Paul Nowakowski, the Register and Probate of Waukesha County, and you're going to hear from Beth Taylor, an attorney who's done probate work for 25 years. They have never seen somebody file a quote-unquote real will a year after. And they've certainly never heard it being done as a test. Because that's what Ms. Kurcewski says. She says, I filed that will originally, and this was all a test Anthony Posa was supposed to pass. And he failed because he questioned what I spent things on. And lo and behold, she tries to leave herself as the sole beneficiary of what's left of the estate that she stole from. Just more lies. And that leads me, and I think this is my second to last slide. But when we look at all those facts and circumstances, when you're talking about what was Ms. Kurcewski's intent, did she have that intent to kill, and what was her knowledge and intent as it related to the theft, remember the instruction says you have to look at all the facts and circumstances. And here they are pretty simply, I think. Between January of 16 and October 3rd of 2018, Ms. Kurcewski was able to steal $144,000 plus from Lynn Hernan while she was still alive. Ms. Kurcewski got it to a point where Lynn Hernan, as of October 8, 2018, lost almost all of that $250,000, right? It was down to $87. Now that she's worth nothing, her credit cards are maxed out, her bank account, one of them is at $87, another one's at $52. She's worth nothing, unfortunately, to Ms. Kurcewski. But her estate is valued at approximately $150,000. And Ms. Kurcewski helps herself to $87,000 of that. Lynn Hernan's murder falls so conveniently for Ms. Kurcewski as to when she could maximize her profit off Lynn Hernan. And this is not a suicide. This was intentional homicide. So I come back to what I told you was the heart of this case, Lynn Hernan. And justice for Lynn Hernan here is 3 guilty verdicts for Jessy Kurcewski. And that's what the state is asking you to return here. Thank you.
We'll take another quick fan break. So please rise before we have the defense come on up. Attorney Galaviz, do you want the lapel so you don't have to worry about the microphone, or?
I got you.
Anybody need any water?
So you don't get feedback, why don't you hand Madam Clerk the other mic since you'll have the lapel? The one on the podium, that is. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a seat. And then when you're ready, Attorney Galaviz.
Testing, can you hear me? Yeah. I got to get closer. I want to see you all. Thank you for being here. This is day 2 and only maybe 15 to go. Hopefully sooner rather than later. As the prosecution says, we're going to try to get this case done as quick as possible, but not too quick. This case is extremely important to Jessy. And as you sit there, I want you to look at her. She's presumed innocent. As you sit there, right there. And don't ever let that thought leave your mind. That she's presumed innocent. No matter what he just said. When he's throwing all this stuff at the wall. To try for you to find her guilty. She's presumed innocent. And that's the jury instruction the judge just read to you. All defendants are presumed innocent. And if you can reconcile under reasonable hypothesis that she's innocent, you have to. Of all the charges. If there's any kind of hypothesis, reasonable hypothesis that she's innocent, you gotta find her not guilty. And I hope you understand that. as you sit here every single day, as you listen to their case, I want you to keep in your mind that she's presumed innocent. And never lose that thought as you hear their witnesses. Because in order to find her guilty, under common sense and logic, which you're allowed to do, your common sense and life experiences, you're going to have to speculate. And the judge just told you can't do that. You're going to have to guess and speculate what Lynn Hernan thought while all this was going on. And if Lynn Hernan was here today, she would say, "Are you crazy, prosecution?" That's my daughter that you have sitting there at that desk over there. That's my daughter. She knew everything that I was doing when I was doing this. I loved her. I loved her. She's my daughter. I've known her since she was 8 or 9 years old. That's how long Lynn knew Jessy, since she was a child. Here's a picture of Lynn and Jessy, a graduation party that Lynn threw for Jessy, high school. And there's more photos of Lynn. See how she's grabbing her in these photos? Look at her, how she's grabbing Jessy. This is my daughter. She's so proud of Jessy. Has her arms around her, a hand on her head. That's who Jessy is to Lynn. Her daughter, even though not by blood. And there's more photos. Same photo. Lynn liked jewelry. She liked getting her nails done and her hair done. But she loved that person that she has her arms around. And there's more photos of Lynn and Jessy. Look how she's holding her. This is my daughter. I'm so proud of her. And them not knowing this about Lynn and Jessy, not knowing the dynamics about Lynn and Jessy, maybe in their view of this, it doesn't make sense to them. Why Lynn would give Jessy all this money, why a mother would give their daughter or their son money. And as he said, he's correct. Lynn had 2 groups of friends. She had Jennifer and Jessy, and then she had Keith, James, Corrine, and Anthony. But the problem was, with what he told you is, we all have circles in our lives. Circles. Where we only keep a few people in our circle. And only these few people that we have in our circle, the people that know our secrets. That we talk to every day and share everything with. When we're not feeling good or feeling happiness and sadness. And that was Jennifer and Jessy. She was in Lynn's circle. When Lynn needed help, she called on them. Every single time. When Lynn needed help, she called on Jennifer. Jennifer's like her best friend. And Jessy became her best friend. When Lynn needed to move, in 2009, Jennifer helped her, and Jennifer's boyfriend, Gary Verdon. She didn't call Keith, James, Anthony, or Corrine. Who do you call when you move? Your friends, your closest friends or relatives. That's who she called, Jennifer. When Lynn needed to move into this condo, who did she call? Jennifer and Gary Verdun. She didn't call James, Keith, Corrine, or Anthony. They didn't help her. When Lynn's mother died in 2013, Who did she call to help her drive to Madison and help clean up her mother's place and get it ready to sell? Jennifer and Gary. They drove to Madison and helped Lynn with clean out her mother's house. She didn't call these four other people. They weren't in her circle. That inner circle. And their documents that they gave us is in the proof. Her bank account. Lynn had all this money in two bank accounts. Her checking account and her money market account. Who was on her account with her? Joint. Jennifer. Jennifer Flower. That was her checking account. Jennifer was joint on that account. She loved Jennifer. Her money market account. Again, she had a lot of money in the money market account. Who was on that account? Jennifer. When you have a joint account, who do you put on the account again? Your husband? Your wife? Here, Lynn didn't have anybody. She had Jennifer. Jennifer, it's like together. Lynn needed help, Jennifer helped her. When Jennifer needed help, Lynn helped her. When Jessy needed help, Lynn helped her, because she loved, that's her daughter. Anthony and Courtney, they didn't need help, they had money. This case, as the state's kind of said, during this time, it doesn't make sense to them, is Lynn was on disability, full disability. She had all this money, and she was receiving food stamps. She was getting full insurance and food stamps during this time, since 2009. And that was real important to Lynn, not to lose that. And you can lose it, depends upon how much money you make, money you have in your accounts. Because you're not supposed to get food stamps and full disability. You're not supposed to get disability and food stamps when you got a lot of money. Because why do we want to pay for somebody who's got a lot of money for their insurance and food stamps? Taxpayers. Lynn was on food stamps until she died with all this money. From the moment she inherited all this money till she died. But this is a case where they see a suicide. Can you give me the next slide? Lynn liked her vodka. And when she died on October 3rd, 2018, she had alcohol in her system. I'm not saying she's a bad person. She just liked vodka. She also liked Visine. I have no idea why. Why somebody would put Visine in their alcohol or Visine in water. I don't know why people smoke marijuana. I don't know why people do heroin. I don't know why people do cocaine. I don't know why people do fentanyl. I don't get it. But people like doing it. That stuff doesn't make sense to me, why people want to put that in their body. Lynn liked to put Visine and vodka and water. Why? Who knows? I don't know. Like, I don't know why people do heroin and cocaine. But they like doing it. When Lynn passed away, they talk about, and I want you to hold him to this prosecutor, when he came up here and said, the tetrahydrozoline, the Visine killed Lynn. You hold him to that when he came up here. That's what killed her. To this day, no one's ever died from Visine. Ever. On planet Earth. No one, not one person's ever died from Visine, tetrahydrozoline poisoning. It's never happened. And I learned during this case, it's kind of like marijuana. You know, you can smoke blunt after blunt after blunt after blunt after blunt, and it can't kill you. The ingredients of marijuana. And I learned it through this case. That you can smoke all day, every day, marijuana, it can't kill you. Apparently something with your body. And it's like that with Visine. It can't kill you.
Judge, I'm going to object. That's not what any of the evidence is going to come in to say.
Attorney Galaviz, rephrase.
Well, we'll see.
Your opening statements, not arguments. Save that for your closing.
But when they arrived on the scene, this is what they found at the scene. Clozapine, the one in the middle, I wouldn't be able to say it. Nifedipine. They found more prescription drugs. Empty bottles. A closer look at clozapine. That was empty. More bottles. Baclofen. They found a lot of empty prescription bottles. You know why they were empty? They were inside Lynn. She had about 25 to 30 prescription pills in her system. And she was only supposed to have 5 or 6. And they can't see that as a suicide? When you're only supposed to take 5 or 6 and you get about 25 to 30? You know that baclofen she's not even supposed to have in her system. And she had about 10 to 15 of those pills in her system. That clozapine, she wasn't even supposed to have that in her system. And she had about 10 of those pills. That nifedipine, she was supposed to have that in her system, but not to the volume that she had. She was only supposed to have 1 or 2 in her system, and she had about 7. And you'll hear from people, clozapine kills people. Baclofen kills people. Nifedipine kills people. Reported suicides with those 3 pills. And she had a boatload of that in her system. And they're saying that the Visine kills her. Not these 25 to 30 other pills that she had in her system, that she took, along with the alcohol. Again, more trust Lynn had in Jessy. Here's a living well. April 20th, 2018. Who does she name on the well? Jessy. And the lockbox at the bank? Jessy. Lynn died October 3rd, 2018. That's the responsibility, that connection they had, Jessy and Lynn. Do you see Anthony's name on there, or Keith, or Corrine? Jessy. You know why? Because Jessy was the one that bought her, did all her shopping, took her to the hospital. If she had a medical appointment, Jessy took her. Jessy would come to her house and change her and clean her. When Lynn would have mistakes, Jessy was the one that she would call all the time. You can have Scott Craig's going to tell you, Lynn was always calling her, like almost every single day. Jessy had to drive from Milwaukee to Pewaukee to take care of Lynn. And you can say Jessy ended up quitting her job in June to take care of Lynn. Because Jessy was the only person she trusted. Jennifer was living somewhere else in Milwaukee, but Jessy quit her job to take care of her. And as we all know, taking care of somebody who's in that state of mind is not easy. But Jessy would do all the shopping for her, cleaning, taking her to doctor's appointments, back and forth, back and forth. Because, again, she's in that circle. Next. I don't know if you can shorten that, but this. Yeah, can you move it a little bit? This is Lynn. See the date this license was issued? June 21st, 2018. During this whole time that this is happening, that they're claiming that this is happening. Lynn went and got her license renewed.
Not that good at that, apparently. Here we go.
And on the driver's license, you see that she weighed 150 pounds, give or take. On the autopsy, she weighed 251 pounds. From June to October. She got real sick. We're going to bring in hospital records, and she'll tell you how sick she got and how many times she had to go to the hospital. Lynn was really sick and depressed. And you saw the way she was done up with the hair and nails and jewelry. She didn't look like that anymore. And it was, she didn't want anybody to her house anymore. She didn't want any more visitors because she didn't look, in her mind, the same. She might have looked beautiful to Jessy, but Lynn didn't think she looked beautiful to other people. And you're going to hear her neighbor testify to that. Her name is Jean Tennell, that Lynn became sick, hidden in her home. She was depressed. Next slide, please. This is a side audit. You can see it, but it basically proves that Lynn was the cyclobenzaprine. She asked, the doctor took her off of it in the beginning of January 2018. So she shouldn't even have had it in her system in October. She stopped taking it in 2018. And the next slide will be baclofen. She stopped taking it in March of 2018. She shouldn't even have had it in her system in October of 2018. Why would she take it if she stopped taking it at the beginning of the year? In such volumes of baclofen. She's only supposed to take one a day. She had 10 to 15 in her system. Like cyclobenzaprine, why would she take it? She told her she stopped taking it. Because she wants to kill herself. She wants to die. She doesn't like life. Doesn't make sense to them, but shooting yourself with a gun doesn't make sense to me. Jumping off a building doesn't make sense to me. Stepping in front of a train, moving train doesn't make sense to me. Suicide doesn't make sense to us who like living. But for somebody who's depressed and tired, why do you want to take their life? I have no idea. But Lynn did for some reason on October 3rd, 2018. Why does she have 25 to 30 pills in her system? They don't think that's a suicide? That must have been the tetrahydrozoline. Next slide, please. They talk about eye drops, and every time Lynn went to the doctor, every time since 2017 and 18, she went to the doctor a lot of times. Pain management, Aurora, Waukesha. She always complained about her eyes. She had to take eye drops. Every single time you'll see it on her lab after medical report, eye drops, complaint of eye drops, pain in my eyes. And they didn't understand why she was always buying Visine. She was drinking it and using it. She needed eye drops. According to the hospital records, it's not something Jessy made up. It's in the hospital records. You'll see Aurora, pain management, Waukesha, eye drops. Complaining about pain in her eyes. Next slide, please. The medical examiner said tetrahydrozoline was what killed her. And she was also using these other baclofen. She wasn't using them. She shouldn't have had baclofen in her system again. She shouldn't have had these drugs, these other drugs. They're basically saying she took these voluntarily, these other 25 to 30 pills. She took those voluntarily, along with the alcohol. But the tetrahydrozoline, no, she didn't take that voluntarily. That doesn't even make sense. You're saying she took 25 to 30 pills voluntarily? Again, 2 of them that she shouldn't have had in her system, but the Visine did it. Next slide, please. Again, these are all her prescription pills that we found that were found on the scene. That's just one of two pages that were found at the scene. Next slide. Also, it doesn't make sense. They're saying that Jessy set this up. You know, remember when officers arrived on the scene? Do you think this was a suicide? Do you think Jessy would be jumping up and down? Yes, 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 yes. It's a suicide. This is definitely a suicide. Yes. You know what she said? She goes, I don't know. I don't think so. She said, I don't know. You don't want to think the worst, but you know, she would have been saying, yeah, for sure. She did. It was a suicide. But Jessy was being honest. I don't know. And you think if she would have set it up, and according to them, the Visine is in that water bottle, why would she leave it there at the scene with her fingerprints all over it? You know, it's like shooting somebody with a gun and then leaving the gun on the scene and running away so they can find the gun and your fingerprints on it. Why in the world would she leave the bottle of Visine right there so people can find it with her fingerprints on it? If that was actually what killed her. Next slide, please. I want to touch a little bit about the finances, and they're going to mention about these checks, and you're going to hear, and I'm going to, with their witnesses, tell you that Lynn went to the bank a lot of times. When all this was going on, her checks were being used, checks were being given to Jessy, her charge cards were being used by Lynn and Jessy. Lynn was always at the bank. She would make deposits, withdrawals. You're going to see them. Lynn would go personally to the bank and go to and do these transactions. You don't think the tellers are telling her about her account, the balances on her account? You don't think she's asking for, like, can I have a balance on my account? That's what happens at a bank. You do a withdrawal or a deposit, you get a balance. Like Lynn is now aware that Jessy's stealing this money. They were so sure that that these checks were forged by Lynn. They were so sure at the beginning of this case. And Jessy kept telling him, I didn't forge them. Lynn gave them to me. Lynn gave me this money. He didn't mention we sent the checks to the FBI to see who wrote those checks. Did he say that? Jessy said, send them to the FBI. I didn't write them. Whatever they say. You know what the FBI said? The analyst? Lynn wrote them. Jessy didn't write them. Didn't write any of those checks. Did he mention that in his opening? I don't think so.
I object to that line. That's not what the FBI report says.
We'll see.
Move on.
And you're going to see also through their documents that they gave us that Lynn applied for a loan in 2018 February for a $30,000 loan, or $35,000 at BMO Harris Bank. Why would she apply for a $30,000 loan if she thought she had all this money in her bank? Why in the world would she apply for $30,000? If she had all this money in her checking account and all this money in her market account, why would she need a loan? She was denied. The bank denied her. If she had all this money in her account, why would the bank deny her? And then she tried for another loan. Her and Jessy. Now, I'll be honest with you. Her and Jessy filed some fraudulent documents to get this other loan through Wells Fargo. Lynn and Jessy together. They applied, falsified Lynn's earnings. And she got that loan, Jessy and Lynn. But Lynn knew about it. Lynn had to go to the bank, Wells Fargo, and sign for that loan before they could get the money. Jessy and Lynn in front of Lynn was with, they were together to Wells Fargo Bank to sign for that loan, March 8, 2018. Wells Fargo in Pewaukee. Again, Lynn loved Jessy. That was her daughter. She was in that circle. But if Lynn was here, she wouldn't believe that Jessy's sitting over there to start with. Had she known this was going to happen, I think she would have did something different. I don't think, never in her wildest dream would she ever think Jessy would get arrested for a suicide that Lynn committed, or being charged with money that Lynn gave to her. Jessy's innocent. You know, when he talked about that the people from probate said, we never seen this will like this. You know what the medical examiner is going to tell you? I've never seen tetrahydrozoline before either. This is my first time ever. This is when she gets up there and testifies, she goes, I've never, ever seen tetrahydrozoline. I had to research it and talk to people and read literature about it from the experts. And one of those experts is named Henry Speller, leading expert in the world on tetrahydrozoline poisoning. And you're going to hear from him. We're going to bring him in. Literature that the medical examiner read. And you're going to hear from Mr. Speller about tetrahydrozoline poisoning. She's innocent. Find her not guilty.
Thank you, Attorney Galaviz. I think it'll be a great time just to have a afternoon break and give everyone an opportunity to have a little comfort break, and then we'll come back in about 15-20 minutes with the start of testimony. All rise for the jury, please.